You're listening to the Ordinary Vegan Podcast, where we teach you everything you need to know about adopting a plant-based diet full or part-time. Our goal is to empower you to live a long and healthy life. You can find today's show at ordinaryvegan.net or on iTunes. If you have any questions, please send an email to questions@ordinaryvegan.net.
Hello, friends, and welcome to the Ordinary Vegan Podcast, number 38, Longevity and the Secrets to a Long, Vibrant Life with Dr. Valter Longo. If you're new to this podcast, my name is Nancy Montori, and I advocate a plant-based diet for optimum health, and what is best for your health also happens to be best for the planet. Not only that, a plant-based diet extends kindness to animals. What more could we ask for? Thank you all for being here today. I appreciate your emails, your kind words, your reviews on iTunes, and all your support. It is what keeps me going. Today is very exciting because we are welcoming Dr. Valter Longo, who has dedicated his life to helping people live a long, healthy life. Dr. Longo is an Italian-American cell biologist who is the director of USC's Longevity Institute. He is well known for his studies on the role of fasting and nutrition to help protect aging and diseases from aging. In addition to his day job, he has a best-selling book called The Longevity Diet, which features the 5-day Fasting-Mimicking Diet, which provides an easy-to-understand roadmap to living well longer through nutrition. And don't be fooled by the name 5-day Fasting-Mimicking Diet, because this approach is fasting with food and having all the health benefits of fasting without the hunger. Some of you might remember that my guest, Dr. Joel Kahn, and I discussed Dr. Longo's program on podcast 22. So let's meet Dr. Valter Longo and discuss how we can protect ourselves from aging and chronic disease with the 5-day Fasting-Mimicking Diet. Hi, Dr. Longo, and thank you so much for being here.
Hello, thanks for having me.
The International Food Information Council released their 13th annual Food and Health Survey, and they announced that the top new eating pattern cited was intermittent fasting. And over 10% of the people surveyed said they were practicing some kind of intermittent fasting. So this is perfect timing to have you on this podcast because I know there are so many people out there confused about what intermittent fasting is, and most people think it means going without food. But that is not the case all the time, and especially with your book and fasting plan called The Longevity Diet, 5-day Fasting-Mimicking Diet. So welcome, Dr. Longo. And if you don't mind, I wanted to start with your early years because I know from experience that being with someone you love at the point of their death is a profound experience and changes you forever. Can you share your story as a boy in Italy and what could have been your life-changing moment?
Yeah, so when I was a music student in Texas, and then I switched over to biochemistry to study aging, and that's when I started thinking, why did I do that? Why all of a sudden I go from music to being sure that I wanted to study aging? And so my suspicion is that when I was 5 years old, I went with my mother to see my grandfather who was dying. And I was actually in the room when he died, and I think that's just that exposure to the moment of death is probably something that stuck in my head, and basically made me probably very worried, and worried about my parents and probably myself, and And that's probably, I assume, how I started. I never thought about this. It's not like it's something that I continued to think about, but it was probably something that was part of my development. It was in my brain from the very beginning that people are going to die, and that is very ugly in the sense that it makes everybody cry, it makes everybody very upset, and all of that. And so I think probably I made the decision that there was nothing much more important than that.
From Italy, you went to Chicago to live and study music. And what did you discover there that further got you interested in longevity and aging?
Yeah, so first I discovered that we could eat a lot more than I ate in Italy, and that we would eat lots of meat and lots of cheese and sugary drinks and cookies. And but then at the same time, I started noticing that my relatives, my family members, many of whom were 100% Southern Italians, but they were getting diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and of course these happened in Italy, but they did not happen like were happening in Chicago. So I think there was another moment where I realized that I started connecting things and connecting food with problems that I never seen to that degree in the past, and so that I think certainly contributed to my interest in studying something that would not just solve the problems of my grandfather, but now also my cousins, my aunts, et cetera, et cetera. I really saw that the consequences of poor nutrition.
After Chicago, you ended up in North Texas for music education. So, what changed your path? How do you go from rock musician to scientist?
Well, basically at University of North Texas, which, by the way, was the most famous jazz program in the nation, and I think still is. And I took a year of the courses and classes, and then they asked me to direct a marching band. And I was a rock musician, and that was not something that I was willing to do. And so I told the counselor there, and they said, basically, this is what you have to do. And if you don't want to do it, then you got to find something else to do. And so that was, I think, the motivation that I had been looking for a while to get out and do something that maybe I was even more passionate about. At least I'm still very passionate about music, but this is not the career that I probably wanted, and so I think biochemistry made a lot more sense. Yeah, so then I just walk over to the chairman of biochemistry department, and I remember I told him I'm a jazz musician. I never took a biology course, but I want to study biochemistry, and I still remember he started laughing. And he told me, like, you're not going to last very long here. And but I guess not. I guess I did last longer.
Wow. So a marching band changed the course of your life. I love stories like that. So then you ended up in Los Angeles. And what made you to decide to address the problem of aging full steam and heading up the USC Comprehensive Aging Center?
Yes, so that decision was already made my second year in college, and I started working already in Texas with Robert Gracie, who was one of the leading figures in Texas for aging, and then I went to LA to study aging, and in fact, in LA there were the two people that I thought, at least at the time, they were the leading in the world for aging research, and one was Roy Walford at UCLA, and the other was Caleb Finch at USC. And I ended up with Walford first for my PhD, and with Caleb Finch second for my postdoctoral training.
Wow, Walford, he ended up dying right after a sealed living experiment. Is that what happened? The biosphere 2?
Yeah. So Walford, when I joined his lab in 1992, he was not in the lab at UCLA. He was actually in Arizona, locked up in this Biosphere 2 operation in the middle of the desert. And I actually went to welcome them when they exited Biosphere 2.
Wow.
And there was a great experience. There was a lot of crazy people there. And I remember meeting Timothy Leary and having a long discussion about bees with Timothy Leary. And so it was a very interesting crowd. And but yeah, they had done 2 years of calorie restriction essentially. So where everybody's calories were restricted to about 25-30% below the normal levels, and they were very much looking anorexic when they came out. So it was a very pioneering idea and experience, but certainly it was very clear to me that calorie restriction, which by the way had been studied for almost 100 years, and it was believed to be very promising for human beings. But that was one of the moments where I decided I don't want to work on calorie restriction. This is not the way to do it. And so then there was also the moment where I decided I wanted to find something that could keep the good aspects of calorie restriction, but eliminate the bad ones.
In your book, you explain exactly what is aging. And can you explain to the ordinary vegan audience, and can you tell us how come humans age?
Well, all organisms age, and there are possibly a few exceptions, but it's not quite clear that there are exceptions. And essentially, the organisms age because the natural selection is this force that operates, and all organisms are shaped by natural selection. And eventually, as the organism, like human beings, get to the age, say, age 40 or 50, historically, we will have had many children by then. And then the force of natural selection starts declining, meaning it's not that important to keep somebody alive after age 50. Of course, people can live longer than that, but there is not a strong force ensuring that happens. So aging really begins to happen visibly when this natural selection force starts declining. And of course, aging begins at birth or even before birth, but you don't really see it until somebody's 40, 50, 60. And really, at the cellular level, it is a deterioration essentially, and a loss of function, and usually accompanied by accumulation of damage, including, say, oxidative damage, but not just oxidative damage. There are all kinds of changes that occur in cells and molecules within cells that make these cells less functional.
So what keeps an organism or a cell young? And can you tell us about that experiment you did where a 2.5-year-old mouse ended up living 5 years, which was twice as long as the mouse should have lived?
Yes. What keeps, in the book I talk about a new concept, at least in the biology field, which is juventology or juventology. And the idea is that to shift the focus from gerontology, which is a well-established field studying aging, to juventology, which will be a field studying youth, and how you stay young. And so we had back in the early 90s, after I left Walford's lab, we started manipulating simple organisms, and we were able to make yeast. The kind of microorganisms that are used to make bread and wine, we were able to extend the lifespan by tenfold. And then it wasn't us, but it was Andrei Barkey and Holly Bromborg that did a combination of dietary intervention, which is, by the way, what we did also in yeast. It was fasting plus genetic manipulation. Together, they made the yeast live 10 times longer. And Bromborg and Barkey did the same for mice, and genetic mutation plus a calorie restriction. And the mice that normally were 2.5 years old, they will live about 2.5 years. They lived about 5. Then we went ahead and studied the people that have the genetic mutation. Unfortunately, we could not change their diet because this would be impossible to do in humans. But we now publish a series of papers showing high protection against cancer, high protection against diabetes, protection against cognitive decline, etc., in these individuals that have the same mutation essentially as the mice, and very similar mutation to the humans, to the yeast. Yeah.
So, in your book, you explain how a fasting mimicking diet throws our bodies into repair mode. Can you explain exactly how that works in a human's body?
Yes. So the fasting, the more we work on it, the more we start suspecting that it may be similar to sleep, which is it was probably an opportunity for any organism to get rid of damaged components and replace these damaged components with new ones. And so now in a series of papers, we've shown that in mice, but also the early evidence is supportive for humans. When you start fasting the mouse, the mouse start getting rid of intracellular components. So inside of the cells, lots of the organelles and molecules are being broken down, and at the same time, the organs are starting to kill cells and get rid of lots of cells that might not be very functional anymore, and at the same time, the body turns on stem cells. And these stem cells are standing by, getting ready for the refeeding, the moment where you return to feeding normally. And that's where lots of the rebuilding occurs, both inside of the cell and at the organ and systems level. And we think that this clearance of damage and rebuilding is really at the center of the many beneficial effects that we have shown with the use of fasting mimicking diets.
Well, how does the body know how to kill bad cells and not kill good cells?
Well, we don't know yet. But for example, we know that the body can do that during development, right? So during development, lots of immune cells and lots of cells in every organ are killed if they're not perfect. So the body is very sophisticated and very much able to select only the very best and getting rid of the ones or the cells that are not dysfunctional or non-functional. So we assume that that ability is conserved for the clearance process. And so that it's used to get rid of bad cells and generate good cells.
So maybe this is a good time to explain what is a fasting mimicking diet exactly.
Yes, a fasting mimicking diet. It essentially, when we started first working on with cancer patients, we realized we had done some studies, lots of studies on water-only fasting in mice. And then we try to apply this to cancer patients. And it was very clear from the very beginning that the cancer patient did not want to do water-only fasting, and the oncologist did not want them to do water-only fasting. And so then we turned to the National Cancer Institute at the NIH and basically received funds to develop a fasting mimicking diet. So a diet that the patients could consume and it will be as effective as water-only fasting. Trying, of course, to make it also safer for patients, so make it more doable, but also make it safer, and potentially make it of superior efficacy. So that's what fasting-mimicking diet is. It really takes advantage of all the knowledge we had. For example, we had discovered in the lab that certain amino acids within proteins are regulating a set of genes called IGF-1 and TOR, the same genes that I was talking about earlier in the mice that live longer, in the humans that live longer. These are downregulated. So these amino acids, when you have lots of proteins, lots of amino acids, these genes are activated, and they accelerate aging when they're active. And the same thing happens for sugars, which control something called pKa. So when pKa, TOR, and IGF-1, when they're all active, the cell and the organism is aging at a more rapid pace. And the fasting-mimicking diet is exploiting this knowledge by having low components that activate these pathways, so that the body responds as if it was fasting on water only.
So you created a specific meal plan. And can we break down in that meal plan the sugar, the proteins, the fats, and the carbohydrates to understand what are good and bad?
Yeah, I mean, keep in mind that there is over 20 years of research there, and many years of development for the kit. But essentially, it's a low protein, it's a low sugar, it's a relatively high carbohydrate, but only carbohydrates are mostly coming from plants and from vegetables. And it's a high fat diet, but only certain fats, mostly coming from different type of nuts. So these are just the general features of it, and but it's also lots of effort put into it to make sure that when somebody has, let's say, the bar that we have in the Prolong kit, that people feel they're not going to feel full, but they feel fuller they will have if the same ingredients were not selected. And so there's all kinds of tricks that go in there to make it safer and make it more doable and maintain its efficacy.
Can you talk a little bit more about protein and sugar restriction for people out there who might not want to go on a restrictive diet, and maybe they can just cut back on their protein and sugar? Can you recommend why you think that would be a good idea?
I don't think that would be a good idea. I think that in the book I distinguish two different things. One is the everyday diet. So in the everyday diet, absolutely, it would be good to have lower but enough proteins, right? That's very important. If you go too low in proteins, now you can get in trouble. And that's the same thing for sugar, low but enough. Why is that? Well, our body functions on sugar. I mean, most people forget that we need to have a relatively high level of sugar all the time. Our brain needs it all the time, right? So otherwise, we die very rapidly. And so for the everyday diet, I think it's good to keep it about 0.35 grams of proteins per pound of body weight per day. So if you weigh 100 pounds, that's about 35 grams of protein. And if you weigh 150 pounds, now you go to 51 grams of protein or whatever, something like that. Yeah. So that's good to keep it around that. And the more is vegan, the better it is. In the book, I talk about maybe a couple of times a week to have fish. And the reason for that is that for lots of people, if you talk to 1 million people and they all switch to become vegan, lots of them will become malnourished. That doesn't mean that you need to be malnourished if you're vegan. You can be perfectly well nourished just by being vegan. I'm just The concern is when lots of people go on it without necessarily talking to a nutritionist and without paying attention. So that's probably a good combination. Mostly vegan, but with a couple of fish meal per week, and then the sugar is also good to keep it low. And so in the book I talk about low fruit actually, and of course very low levels of candy and added sugar. But I talk about high carbohydrate. Lots of people that don't understand that. How can I talk about a high carbohydrate diet and a low sugar? Well, absolutely. You can have lots of carbohydrates coming from legumes, from beans, from carrots, from all kinds of different vegetables that have relatively high levels of carbohydrates, and those are very excellent sources of carbohydrates. And the carbohydrates at the end of the day should represent maybe 55, maybe 60% of the diet, with 30% going to fat, coming from fat, and 10% coming from protein. So this is the everyday diet. The fasting mimicking diet is very different. This is what we call periodic fasting. People bunch it into the intermittent fasting, but I don't like that at all. Why is that? So basically, the intermittent fasting is a chronic diet that you would do. Let's say something like alternate day fasting. One day you eat, one day you don't, or fasting for 16 hours every day. And that's very reminiscent to me of the calorie restriction studies, in which every day people would be restricted by 25, 30%. And both the human and monkey studies show that this calorie restriction has incredible benefits. But in the end, the incredible benefits are counterbalanced by the problems. So for example, the monkeys had incredible reduction in diabetes if they were calorie restricted, 50% lower cancer, 50% lower cardiovascular disease. Yet, when you look at their lifespan, they didn't live much longer than the monkeys that were not calorie restricted. So intermittent fasting reminds me a lot of that. And I think we're going to see the same, good and bad. Periodic fasting and fasting, and particularly fasting mimicking diet, instead, is something very different, and it's really on a need-to-do-it basis, right? So, if you are somebody who's a 35-year-old athlete, has a vegan pescatarian diet, is in perfect health, and none of the markers are out of the ideal range, you might need to do this a couple of times a year, right? For 5 days. Why? Because I think that resetting that the fasting mimicking diet gives is probably beneficial to everyone, as we've shown in the clinical trial. But it is mostly beneficial to people that begin to have problems. So, for example, in the clinical trial, we saw that people that had high cholesterol had a major drop in cholesterol. People that had high triglyceride had a major drop in triglycerides. People that had high blood pressure had a drop in blood pressure. Same thing for CRP, systemic inflammation, and the people that were pre-diabetic. Most of them moved back to the normal state. So these people, let's say somebody was obese and had high cholesterol, high blood pressure, that person would probably need to do the fasting mimicking diet once a month for 5 days until they move to a different category. Let's say that now from obese they become overweight and they only have high cholesterol. They maybe can do it once every 2 months, and then they can move to once every 3 or 4 months. And eventually, if they can ever make it to a perfect ideal diet and exercise, etc., then maybe they can do it twice a year, just as the super healthy 35-year-olds.
So you have found through studies that the fasting mimicking diet can help fight chronic diseases like diabetes?
Yes. Well, the diabetes clinical, now we're running 2 clinical trials, one on metabolic syndrome, which is about to start in Los Angeles, and one on diabetes type 2, which is about to start in Holland. So we'll have the results, I guess, in the next couple of years. on diseases. But what we clearly see in the study that we published, but also we hear this everywhere from doctors everywhere, because now over 50,000 people have done Prolon. So, for example, today I was in the cancer center, and the doctor told me here in Geneva, and the doctor said, "Well, we have somebody that was diabetic essentially, or close to diabetes diagnosis, and they had cancer. So they were in the clinical trial to do the fasting-mimicking diet for cancer. But sure enough, after 3 cycles, this person HbA1c, the marker for diabetes, moved back to the normal range. So this is we've shown it in the clinical trial." But now we're also hearing it from many doctors. So it looks like it certainly helps the pre-diabetic and the people with metabolic syndrome. But the formal demonstration that it can treat diabetes and metabolic syndrome has not yet occurred.
Well, since we're on the subject of the Prolon kit, can you talk about what is in the Prolon kit? And for everybody out there listening, Dr. Longo created a 5-day plan that you can just purchase, and everything is in little individual boxes by day. And I have done it, and it was, I thought it was amazing how I felt after. So can you talk about what is exactly the Prolon kit?
Yes. First of all, let me say that all my shares in the company are assigned to a nonprofit foundation, and I don't take any consulting from the company. So I want to make sure that people understand that the kit we really develop as we did for cancer patients. We did it for normal subjects, and we really developed it because we felt at the university that this was the way the doctors and registered dietitian and all the professionals there, but also people without the doctors, if they're very healthy, they do not need the doctor, although we recommend it, and they can do the Prolon on their own. But we wanted to just standardize and make sure that everybody gets to the same benefits that we've shown in the clinical trial. And so this is a 5-day kit, and every day everything comes in a box. It's a vegan diet, and it's about 1,100 calories on day 1, and then it goes down to about 800 calories on day 2 to 5. It's really made to be high nourishment, so the vitamins, the minerals, et cetera, they're all in there. It's meant to have high safety, so we pay particular attention to have enough salts in there, the right kinds, and have essential fatty acids, etc. So we want to make sure that we really prevent problems. And I have to say, out of 50,000 people that have gone through it, we've seen remarkably low levels of side effects. And so I think we're very proud of this safety record, but also, of course, of the efficacy record.
So after a week of doing this meal plan, did you have proof that the body actually regenerates itself at the cellular and organ levels? And how should people feel while they're on the diet?
Yeah, so we've done a number of studies in mice, and of course in humans, regeneration is much more difficult to demonstrate. We did demonstrate in humans that circulating stem cells were elevated, but it's almost impossible to show the regeneration. But in mice, we could show regeneration, and so we were able to do a series of mouse studies in which we showed that we could demonstrate regeneration in the blood system, regeneration in the nervous system, in the pancreas, and in a number of additional organs and systems. So, for example, we could, in a mouse model, do damage to the pancreas and then start the fasting-mimicking diet and show that the cycles of fasting-mimicking diet and refeeding are able to promote the regeneration of insulin-producing beta cells in the pancreas. And we suspect similar effects go on in many different systems. This is the cellular regeneration. We also know that there is lots of inside of the cells processes that occur, and so we're now focusing on those, and as well as looking at stem cells in all kinds of different organs, and we're beginning to also think about this in humans. Can we demonstrate the stem cells are regenerating during the FMD recycles?
I also love that you provide meal plans in your book for people that might not be able to get the Prolon kit. And I did notice that you do recommend olive oil in your meal plans. Does that apply to people with heart disease? Because I know you know this. Most of our plant-based gurus like Dr. Esselstyn and Dr. McDougall say no oil when you have heart disease.
Yeah, I disagree with them. And I don't disagree just based on my opinion. I disagree based on large randomized clinical studies done in Spain and elsewhere, where over and over and over certain type of fats are shown to be clearly protective against heart disease. Even in subjects that were already at high risk for heart disease. And these are not small studies. They're studies with thousands of patients. And I will challenge Dr. Esselstyn and everybody else to produce as many studies that have already been published to be able to counter these studies. And I think it would take 20 years to do that. I'm not arguing that if you stay without fats, that would be beneficial. I believe the Esselstyn data and the Dean Ornish data. I just do not see any evidence that olive oil and nuts are bad. And in fact, study after study after study have shown exactly the opposite in a very dramatic way, by the way, to the point that the Astroc study in Spain had to be altered going against the low-fat diet because the low-fat group of thousands of heart disease patients was doing so much worse that for ethical reasons, they had to stop the study to allow everybody to go on olive oil and nuts. So I think you have to go with the data. In the book, I talk about pillars, and clinical randomized clinical studies are one of the pillars. But also in the book, I talk about a centenarian pillar, and whether you look at Sardinia, Italy, you look at Greece, Icaria, Greece, you look at Calabria, Italy, zones with record longevity, the olive oil and olives are one of the major foods that they have in their diet. So it's another pillar suggesting that this idea, and again, these are populations that as a whole have relatively low, for example, the Cilento region in Italy, very high olive oil consumption, very low cardiovascular disease. So it's evidence after evidence after evidence that in general, that's not the case. Again, not to argue that if you go without any fats, you don't benefit. But this points to the problem being the saturated fats, the trans fats, and all the junk fats that is very common in Europe and the United States, and not the olive oil and the nuts.
Two things that really stood out to me in your book is that you mentioned that you should select ingredients among those that your ancestors would have eaten. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Well, that's just part of what I say. The other part, I think, which a lot of people miss, is that those ingredients must come from the longevity diet, right? So, because, and I guess I wasn't very clear in the book. I thought it was clearer, but it's not. Meaning that now, having selected the vegan pescatarian ingredient category, then you go look at what's common with your grandparents and great grandparents' diet. And so the idea is, if your grandparents ate meat 5 times a week, that's not a good idea because that's not in the longevity diet. But if your grandparents, for example, never are from Japan and never drank milk as adults because they're lactose intolerant, that is a very good thing to stay away from milk as an adult, right? And now I'm giving this example because we know how damaging it can be to somebody who's lactose intolerant to keep drinking milk as an adult. So so then by looking at the healthy ingredients in the longevity diet, and then also the ones that match your grandparents' diet, you really avoid lots of foods like lactose, like milk, cow milk, that could, in your particular genetic background, could cause problems. And gluten is a new one. Now we have we're exposed to high levels of gluten, and at least a percentage of the population develops immunity against the gluten, and therefore an autoimmunity is because now you're exposed to much higher levels of gluten than your grandparents were exposed to, and this is probably also becoming particularly problematic when you combine it with antibiotics, with all kinds of disruptors that may make your gut much more leaky, like aspirin or NSAIDs and other drugs of that kind that lots of people are taking daily or very frequently. So now I think autoimmunities are rising very rapidly around the world, and we got to start paying attention now to all kinds of ingredients. And one of them that Dr. Gundry talks about in his book is lectins. And, so most people are not going to have a problem with lectins because they might have bacteria that take care of that. But some people, particularly those that are now exposed to lectins that were not a part of the family diet, so if your grandparents never ate tomatoes, for example, and your great-grandparents never ate tomatoes, and all of a sudden you combine antibiotics with tomatoes, you might end up having a problem because of the lectins contained in tomatoes, right? So this is, another example, or the gluten contained in wheat germ.
Wow. Well, the very last thing I want to mention, and you mentioned it earlier, is your foundation, Create Cures. I read in your book that all proceeds from your book and from the Prolon Fast-Mimicking Diet 1-week kit go to this foundation. And can you briefly tell me what the foundation's mission is?
Yes, so the foundation is called Create Cures, createcures.org. And the mission is really, in the past 15 years or so, I spent lots of time talking to people, patients, in most cases having that are in trouble, right? They say advanced cancer, advanced autoimmune disorders, and all kinds of other problems like diabetes type 1, diabetes type 2, etc. And I always thought that was really remarkable that somebody could be a stage 4 cancer patient and they go to the oncologist and then they have to go back home and go to the internet and try to figure out how to integrate or add to the standard treatment, which could be chemotherapy or immunotherapy or whatever. And that's what Create Cures is about. It's like the patient shouldn't have to worry about going to the internet to figure out should they have high dose vitamin C or should they fast or whatever the integrative technique will be. I think there should be foundations and hospitals and doctors be able to say, maybe this is not fully tested yet, so we'll give you the standard of care drug, the chemotherapy or whatever. But in addition, we're going to try this because it's safe, it's been well tested, it's not complete, the testing is not completed. But in your case, because you cannot wait, it's worth a shot, And so, yeah, that's what the Create Cures is doing. Try to bring this, what we see be life-changing to so many people. And now, of course, we're not claiming that this is demonstrated by any means with lots of these lethal diseases, but certainly we have many, many stories, success stories, and we're basically saying create cures. Let's do more research to figure out what are these integrative research products, and at the same time provide information to patients about some of the things they can already do without having to do additional research.
Well, congratulations on that. And thank you so much for being here, Dr. Longo, and sharing your wealth of knowledge on aging and longevity. And I love your book, The Longevity Diet, and I hope everyone out there listening buys a copy so they can learn how to slow aging and fight disease. And there is nothing else like it out there. So thanks for being here.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you for the excellent interview.
Thank you. Bye-bye. That's it for today's podcast. You can find links to Dr. Valter Longo's book in this week's show notes, or just search for the Longevity Diet online. You can find the Fasting-Mimicking Diet meal program on prolonfmd.com, and there will be links in this week's show notes for both. I am deeply passionate about changing the way you look at food, and I hope I'm doing a good job. If you have any questions or concerns or feedback, please send me an email at questions@ordinaryvegan.net. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please give it a rating or comment in iTunes. The more reviews this podcast receives, the more prominently it gets featured on iTunes. And don't forget to join our healthy, vibrant community on Facebook at facebook.com/ordinaryvegan. We are over 315,000 strong, and our community loves to help and support each other. You can find all of Ordinary Vegan's recipes and Ordinary Vegan's CBD oil from hemp on ordinaryvegan.net. Thank you all, and I look forward to serving you on my next podcast. Till next time.
Thanks for joining our plant-based community today. Together, we can accomplish great things. Please subscribe so you don't miss any of Ordinary Vegan's recipes and plant-based tips. If you have any questions or feedback, email us at questions@ordinaryvegan.net. Until next time.